David had been driving for 12 straight hours when his car started making that awful grinding noise. Steam began pouring from under the hood, and he knew he was in trouble. The middle of nowhere, Nevada wasn't exactly the best place for a breakdown. But sometimes life doesn't care about your plans. He pulled over to the side of the empty highway and stepped out into the desert heat. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful, sure, but not very helpful when you're stranded with a dead car and no cell phone signal. That's when he saw it, about a mile down the road. A neon sign flickered against the darkening sky. Stardust Inn, it read in bright blue letters. David had never been so happy to see a motel sign in his entire life. He grabbed his overnight bag from the trunk and started walking. The gravel crunched under his feet, and the only sound was the wind whistling through the desert brush. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. As he got closer to the motel, David noticed something odd about the building from the outside. It looked like any other roadside inn, 2 stories, beige paint, typical 1970s architecture. But there was something about the lighting that seemed off. The windows glowed with a soft blue tint, almost like the light was coming from underwater. The parking lot was half full, which surprised him. He hadn't seen another car on the highway for the past hour. Where had all these people come from? And why did some of the vehicles look so unusual? There was a sedan that seemed to shimmer in the fading light, and an SUV that appeared to be made of some kind of metallic material he'd never seen before. David shook his head. He was tired, probably seeing things. After driving cross-country for 3 days straight, anyone would start imagining weird stuff. The lobby was small but clean, with that typical motel smell of industrial carpet cleaner and air freshener. Behind the front desk sat a man who looked to be in his 50s, wearing a standard hotel uniform. But when he looked up at David, something made him pause. The man's eyes seemed to catch the light in a strange way, almost like they were reflecting it back. "Welcome to the Stardust Inn," the clerk said with a smile that seemed genuine enough. "Checking in for the night?" "Yes, please," David replied, digging out his wallet. "My car broke down about a mile back. I'll need to call a tow truck in the morning." The clerk nodded sympathetically. "Happens all the time out here. The desert can be rough on vehicles." He handed David a registration form. "We'll take good care of you. Room 347 is available. Nice and quiet, 3rd floor." David filled out the paperwork, trying to ignore the feeling that the clerk was studying him a little too intently. When he handed back the form, their fingers brushed briefly, and he could have sworn the man's skin felt unusually cool. "Elevators. Just down the hall," the clerk said, handing him a key card. "Enjoy your stay, Mr. Thompson." David headed for the elevator, rolling his shoulders to work out the kinks from hours of driving. The hallway seemed longer than it should have been for such a small building, and he noticed that some of the room numbers didn't quite make sense. There was a room to 101, then to 103, but number to 102. Room to 115 was followed by 218. He was probably just tired, he told himself. Numbers could be confusing when you were this exhausted. The elevator was older, with that classic ding when it arrived. As the doors opened, David caught a glimpse of another guest stepping out, a woman in her 30s with dark hair. But something about the way she moved seemed too fluid, too graceful. She nodded politely as she passed, and David noticed her eyes had an unusual green tint. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt longer than it should have. David found himself studying his reflection in the polished metal doors. He looked tired, sure, but normal. Just a regular guy in his mid-30s, brown hair a little messy from the road, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and jeans. Nothing special about him at all. Room 347 was at the end of the hall, and David was relieved to finally slide the key card and hear the lock click open. The room was standard motel fare: queen bed, small table, bathroom, and a window that looked out over the desert. He dropped his bag on the bed and headed straight for the shower. The hot water felt amazing after the long drive. David stood under the spray for a good 10 minutes, letting the heat work out the tension in his muscles. When he finally stepped Out, he felt almost human again. He had just pulled on a clean shirt when he heard the knock at his door. David glanced at the clock. 9:30 p.m., kind of late for housekeeping. But maybe they were just checking to see if he needed extra towels. Or something. He opened the door and froze. Standing in the hallway was a woman in a hotel cleaning uniform. But everything about her was wrong. Not wrong in a bad way, wrong in a way that made his brain struggle to process what he was seeing. Her skin had a subtle shimmer to it, like it was catching light that wasn't there. Her hair was brown, but as she moved slightly, it seemed to shift to silver and back again. But it was her eyes that really got his attention. They were purple, not blue-purple or violet, but actual purple, deep and rich like amethyst. And when she looked at him, those eyes seemed to have tiny points of light swirling in them, like looking at a galaxy through a telescope. "Hello, beloved," she said. And her voice was warm and musical in a way that made something deep in David's chest respond. "I've been waiting for you to return." David blinked, wondering if he was having some kind of hallucination. Maybe the stress of the move, combined with the long drive and the breakdown, had finally caught up with him. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong room. I just checked in." The woman tilted her head, and the movement was so smooth it seemed almost liquid. Her name tag read Zara, and she was looking at him with an expression that was part joy, part sadness, and part something he couldn't quite identify. "Room 347, she said softly. "David Thompson, born July 15, 1990. You have a small scar on your left shoulder from when you fell off your bike at age 7, while trying to impress the Miller girl next door." David's mouth went dry. How could this strange woman know such specific details about his childhood? He unconsciously touched his left shoulder, where indeed there was a small scar from exactly that incident. He'd never told anyone the real story behind it. "You also hate the smell of vanilla because it reminds you of the candle your grandmother always burned," Zara continued, her purple eyes growing sad. "And you have a recurring dream about flying over a city made of crystal." That last detail hit David like a physical blow. He'd had that dream dozens of times over the years. Always the same, soaring over beautiful spires that seemed to be carved from huge gems. Feeling more at home than he ever had in waking life. He'd never mentioned it to anyone, not even his doctor. "Who are you?" he whispered. Zara's expression became pained, and she looked down at her hands. "Don't you remember me? I'm your wife." The hallway seemed to spin around David. He gripped the doorframe to steady himself. "That's impossible. I've never been married. I've never even seen you before in my life." "The memory blocks are still in place," Zara said, more to herself than to him. "They told me this might happen after the separation protocol." She reached into her cleaning cart and pulled out something that definitely wasn't standard hotel equipment. It looked like a small crystal, but it pulsed with its own inner light. "May I come in? I need to show you something that might help you remember." Every rational part of David's brain screamed at him to close the door, to call the front desk, to do anything but let this impossible woman into his room. But there was something about her presence that felt safe, familiar even, like coming home after a long journey. Against his better judgment, David stepped aside. Zara moved past him into the room, and he noticed she walked with the same fluid grace he'd seen in the elevator. She seemed to know exactly where everything was, moving around the furniture like she'd been in this room hundreds of times before. "You're probably thinking I'm crazy," she said, setting the crystal device on the small table. "And I don't blame you. If someone told me 3 years ago that I'd be standing in a Nevada motel trying to help my husband remember our life together, I would have thought they were crazy too." 3 years ago," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara nodded. "That's when they relocated you. When they made you forget." She looked at him with those impossible purple eyes. "But I never forgot. I could never forget you." David sank into the room's single chair, his mind reeling. This was insane. People didn't just forget entire marriages. Memory didn't work that way. But then again, people didn't have purple eyes that swirled with light either. "I know this is overwhelming," Zara said gently. "But please, let me show you just one thing. If it doesn't mean anything to you, I'll leave and never bother you again. David looked at the crystal device, then at Zara's face. Despite everything rational telling him to run, he found himself nodding. Okay, he said, show me. Zara picked up the crystal device and held it carefully in her hands. The thing was about the size of a smartphone, but it seemed to be carved from a single piece of clear stone. As she touched it, the light inside grew brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. This might feel a little strange at first, she said softly, but don't be afraid. These are your memories, David. They belong to you. David gripped the arms of his chair. My memories? But I remember my whole life. I grew up in Ohio, went to college, got a job in tech support. I'm moving to California for a new position. There's nothing missing. Zara's expression was gentle but sad. Those memories are real, but they're not complete. Think of it like a book where someone carefully removes certain pages. The story still makes sense, but important parts are missing. She activated the device, and suddenly the air in the room began to shimmer. David blinked, wondering if his eyes were playing tricks on him. Then, slowly, images began to form in the space between them. But these weren't just pictures. They were three-dimensional, like holograms, but more real than any technology David had ever seen. And the person in these images looked exactly like him, except he was wearing clothes he'd never owned and standing in places he'd never been. This is impossible, David whispered. But he couldn't look away. The first image showed him standing in what looked like a vast library, but the books seemed to be made of the same crystal material as Zara's device. He was reaching for one of the volumes, and his face showed an expression of wonder and curiosity that seemed completely natural. That's the Archive of Worlds, Zara explained. It's where you first learned about different civilizations. You spent hours there, reading about planets and cultures that most people can't even imagine. The image shifted, showing David in what appeared to be a garden. But the plants were unlike anything on Earth, trees with silver leaves that chimed like bells in the wind, flowers that glowed with their own inner light, grass that seemed to be made of tiny jewels. The Harmony Gardens, Zara said, you told me once that it was the most beautiful place you'd ever seen. You said it made you understand why some things are worth protecting. David's head was starting to pound. Looking at these images felt like trying to remember a dream that was just out of reach. There was something familiar about the scenes, something that resonated deep in his mind, but he couldn't quite grasp it. I've never been to these places, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The images continued to change, showing more scenes of this other David living what appeared to be a completely different life. He saw himself learning to use strange technology, talking with beings that looked almost human but not quite, and always. Zara was there beside him. Then the images changed to something that made David's heart skip a beat. He was watching his own wedding, but it wasn't in any church or courthouse he'd ever seen. The ceremony was taking place in a cathedral that seemed to be carved from a single enormous crystal. The walls stretched up impossibly high, and light streamed through them in patterns that painted rainbows across everything. He watched himself standing at an altar made of the same crystal material, wearing robes that seemed to be woven from starlight itself, and beside him stood Zara, looking exactly as she did now, but wearing a dress that flowed like liquid silver. We were so happy that day, Zara said, her voice thick with emotion. You were nervous about the ceremony because it was so different from Earth traditions. But when you saw me walking down the aisle, you smiled that smile that always made my heart stop. In the holographic image, David saw himself take Zara's hands. Instead of exchanging rings, they placed their palms together on a glowing orb that pulsed with the same purple light. As Zara's eyes, the moment their hands touched the orb, both of them began to glow with a soft, warm light. That's the bonding sphere, Zara explained. It doesn't just represent a promise like your wedding rings do. It creates an actual connection between two people. We could feel each other's emotions, share thoughts, know when the other was in danger. David stared at the image, and something deep in his chest began to ache. It was like homesickness, but for a place he'd never been. "This isn't real," he said, but he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. "Feel your left wrist," Zara said quietly. David looked down at his wrist, confused. There was nothing there except normal skin, but when he touched it, he felt a slight tingling sensation, like the echo of something that had once been there. "There used to be a band there," Zara continued, "made of the same crystal as the bonding sphere. It disappeared when they relocated you, but sometimes phantom sensations linger." The images shifted again, showing more recent scenes. David saw himself and Zara living in what appeared to be a house. But the architecture was unlike anything on Earth. The walls curved organically, and windows seemed to show views of alien landscapes under unfamiliar stars. "Our home," Zara said simply. "We lived there for 2 years. You grew vegetables in the garden, earth vegetables that you taught me to love, tomatoes, peppers, herbs. You said they tasted like home." David watched himself cooking in a kitchen that somehow felt more familiar than his own apartment back in Ohio. He saw himself laughing at something Zara was saying, saw the way he looked at her with obvious adoration. "I don't understand," David said, his voice cracking. "If this is real, if we were really married, why can't I remember any of it?" The images flickered and changed one final time. Now David saw himself in what looked like a courtroom, but the judges weren't human. They were tall, elegant beings with features that seemed to shift between human and something else entirely. Their eyes glowed with an inner light, and when they spoke, their voices seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The Council of Worlds," Zara explained, her voice becoming hard. "They decided that relationships between humans and our people were too dangerous. They said it created instability, that it threatened the balance between our civilizations." In the holographic scene, David watched himself arguing passionately with the council members. He couldn't hear the words, but he could see his own desperation, his refusal to accept whatever they were telling him. "You fought for us," Zara said, tears beginning to stream down her face. "You told them that love didn't recognize species boundaries, that our differences made us stronger, not weaker." But they had already made their decision. The final image showed David strapped to what looked like a medical table, with strange devices pointed at his head. His face showed not pain, but heartbreak and betrayal. Zara was in the scene too, being held back by guards as she tried to reach him. "They told me you had agreed to the procedure," Zara said, her voice breaking. "They said you wanted to forget, that the pain of being separated from both worlds was too much to bear. But I knew you would never choose to forget our love." The images faded, leaving the hotel room feeling strangely empty. David sat in silence, his mind reeling. Part of him wanted to dismiss everything he'd seen as elaborate special effects, but the emotions he'd witnessed in those scenes felt too real, too raw to be fake. "I need to ask you something," David said finally, "and I need you to be completely honest with me." Zara nodded, wiping her eyes. "If all of this is true, if we really were married and they made me forget, then why are you here? Why now? How did you even find me?" Zara looked down at her hands. "Because the memory blocks aren't permanent. They were never meant to be. The council thought that after a few years, you would have built a new life and wouldn't want to remember the old one. But the connection we made through the bonding sphere, it's stronger than they realized." She looked up at him with those impossible purple eyes. "You've been having dreams, haven't you? About flying over crystal cities, about places that feel like home but don't exist anywhere on Earth." David's breath caught. "How do you know about the dreams?" "Because I've been having them too," Zara said. "The bond between us is still there, weakened but not broken, and it's been calling you back to me, just like it's been calling me to you." David felt something shift inside his mind, like a door that had been locked for years suddenly creaking open. Images flashed through his consciousness, not from the holographic device, but from his own memory. The taste of food he'd never eaten, the sound of Zara's laughter, the feel of her hand in his. "Oh my God," he whispered. "It's real. It's all real." And then, like a dam bursting, the memories came flooding back. David was still trying to process everything when the lights in the room suddenly dimmed. It wasn't like someone had turned down a switch. It was as if the very air itself was growing darker. A low humming sound filled the space, so quiet he almost thought he was imagining it. Zara's entire body went rigid. Her purple eyes widened with fear, and she grabbed David's arm. "They're here," she whispered. "The council found us." "What do you mean they found us?" David asked, but even as he spoke, he could feel something changing in the atmosphere around them. The hair on his arm stood up, like the feeling before a thunderstorm. Through the window, David could see what looked like ordinary black cars pulling into the parking lot. But now that his memories were returning, he could see through the disguise. The vehicles moved smoothly, without the slight bounce and sway of normal cars, and the way they positioned themselves around the building was too precise, too coordinated. "How long do we have?" David asked, surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. "Not long," Zara replied, moving quickly to her cleaning cart. She pushed aside the towels and supplies, revealing a hidden compartment filled with devices that definitely weren't standard hotel equipment. The memory restoration process triggered an alert. "They know you're remembering." David watched as she pulled out what looked like a small silver disc. "What's that?" "A portal generator," she said, her hands working quickly to activate it. "It can open a doorway to the sanctuary world. But David, once we go through, there's no coming back. The council will shut down this location permanently." The weight of what she was saying hit him like a physical blow. "You mean I can never return to Earth?" Zara paused in her work and looked at him with those beautiful, impossible eyes. "I'm sorry. I know it's not fair. But if they take you back to the processing center, they won't just block your memories this time. They'll erase everything, your personality, your soul, everything that makes you who you are." David felt his chest tighten. 3 years ago, he might have made this choice easily. But now he had a life on Earth, even if it was built on false memories. He had a job, an apartment, friends who would worry if he disappeared without a trace. "I have people who care about me here," he said quietly. "My coworkers, my neighbors. They'll think something terrible happened to me." Zara's expression softened. "I know, and I'm sorry for that. But David, those relationships were built on a lie. The council gave you a fake identity. False memories of a childhood that never happened. The people you know only know the version of you they created. But it feels real to me," David protested. "Those friendships, the life I've built, it might be based on fake memories, but the emotions are real. The connections are real." The humming sound was getting louder now, and David could hear footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy, measured steps that were moving with purpose toward their room. "David," Zara said urgently, "I need you to understand something. You're not just human. You're a hybrid, part human, part Lyrian. That's why the council is so afraid of you. You represent something they can't control." "A hybrid?" David's mind reeled. "But that's impossible. My parents were both human. I remember them." "Those aren't your real parents," Zara said gently. "Your real father is on the sanctuary world, waiting for you. He's been working with other hybrids and humans to build a place where both species can live together peacefully." David felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Every certainty he'd held about his life was crumbling. "So everything I remember about my childhood is a lie." "Not everything," Zara said. "They used fragments of real experiences and wove them together with false ones. The scar on your shoulder is real. You really did fall off a bike trying to impress a girl. But it wasn't in Ohio, and it wasn't when you were 7. The footsteps in the hallway had stopped. David could hear voices now, speaking in a language that sounded almost familiar. As more of his memories returned, he began to understand fragments of what they were saying. "Skin complete. Target confirmed in room 347. Initiate containment. Protocol. Be advised, subject has accessed restricted memories." David looked at Zara, who was frantically working on the portal device. "They're right outside," he said. "I know," she replied, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool air. "This thing takes time to charge. The portal technology requires enormous amounts of energy." "How much time?" 2 minutes, maybe 3. David moved to the window and looked down at the parking lot. More vehicles were arriving. and figures in dark suits were getting out. From this distance, they looked human enough. But David's returning memories told him otherwise. These were council enforcers, beings who had given up their individual identities to serve the collective will. Zara, he said slowly, what happens if I choose to stay? What happens if I decide that my life on Earth, fake or not, is worth keeping? She stopped working and looked at him with an expression of pure heartbreak. Then they'll take you back to the processing center. They'll erase everything, your memories of Earth, your memories of our life together, everything. You'll become a blank slate that they can reshape however they want. And if I go with you, then we'll be together on the sanctuary world. You'll meet your real father, learn about your heritage, and help build a future where humans and Lyrians don't have to hide from each other. She paused. But you'll never see Earth again. Never see the people you've come to care about here. David closed his eyes. This was impossible. How could anyone make a choice like this? Give up everything you thought you knew about your life, or lose your soul entirely? There's something else, Zara said quietly. The abilities you inherited as a hybrid, they're starting to come back. Can you feel it? Now that she mentioned it, David could feel something stirring inside him. It was like a warm current running through his veins, making him more aware of everything around him. He could sense the electrical systems in the building, feel the energy patterns of the beings gathering outside. What kind of abilities? He asked. Enhanced perception, energy manipulation, the ability to see through illusions. Zara's voice was growing urgent. David, you're not just caught between two worlds, you're the bridge between them. That's why the council is so afraid of you. The door suddenly shuddered, as if something had struck it from the outside. David heard the electronic lock clicking and whirring, as someone tried to override it. They're coming in, Zara said, holding up the portal device. It's almost ready, but I need another minute. David felt that warm current inside him growing stronger. Without really thinking about it, he reached out with his mind and touched the door's locking mechanism. He felt the electronic components, understood how they worked, and with a thought, he reinforced the locks. How did you do that? Zara asked, staring at him in amazement. I don't know, David replied, but even as he said it, he was reaching out further with his enhanced senses. He could feel the enforcers outside, could sense their frustration as they tried to breach the door. 1 minute, Zara said, her voice tight with concentration. The door shuddered again, more violently this time. David realized they were using some kind of advanced technology to break through his reinforcement. David, Zara said, not looking up from the portal device, I need you to know something. Whatever you decide, I'll understand. I love you enough to want you to be happy, even if it means losing you again. David looked at her, really looked at her. This incredible woman who had risked everything to find him, who had waited 3 years for him to remember their love. Then he thought about his life on Earth, the friends who would worry, the simple pleasures of his human existence. The door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. 3 figures in dark suits stepped through the smoke and debris, moving with inhuman grace. They looked human at first glance, but David's enhanced vision could see their true forms, tall, elegant beings with features that seemed to shift and flow like water. David Thompson, the lead figure, said, its voice seeming to come from everywhere at once. You are in violation of the relocation protocol. Return to processing immediately. But something had changed in David. As his abilities awakened, he felt a strength he'd never known before. Energy crackled between his fingers, and he could suddenly see the enforcer's true nature beneath their human disguises. I remember now, he said, his voice gaining power. I remember who I am. And I remember that I never agreed to forget. The lead enforcer paused, its head tilting in that too fluid way. The procedure was implemented for your protection. Your hybrid nature makes you unstable, dangerous to both species. No, David replied, stepping forward. My hybrid nature makes me a bridge. That's what you're really afraid of. Not that I'm dangerous, but that I represent hope for a future where both species can coexist. Behind him, Zara's portal device began to glow with increasing intensity. David, she called out. It's ready. David turned to look at her, then back at the enforcers. In that moment, He realized he wasn't just choosing between two lives. He was choosing between fear and hope, between hiding and standing up for what he believed in. The choice, when it came, was easier than he'd expected. David felt the power flowing through him like electricity, but it wasn't frightening. It felt natural, like he was finally becoming who he was always meant to be. The enforcers moved toward him, but he raised his hand, and a barrier of shimmering energy formed between them. You cannot resist the will of the council, the lead enforcer said. But David could hear uncertainty in its voice. I'm not resisting the council, David replied, his voice steady and strong. I'm choosing my own path. Behind him, Zara's portal device had opened a doorway in the air itself. Through it, David could see a beautiful world with purple skies and crystal cities, but also green forests and blue oceans that reminded him of home. It was like someone had taken the best of both worlds and woven them together. The sanctuary world, Zara said, moving to stand beside him. It's where humans and Lyrians are working together to build something new. Your father is there, waiting for you. David's heart skipped. My real father. He's been working with the resistance for years. Zara explained. He believed that hybrids like you weren't mistakes to be hidden away, but the future of both species. The enforcers pressed against David's energy barrier, but it held firm. He was surprised by how strong he felt, how right this all seemed. You're making a mistake, the lead enforcer said. The sanctuary world is an illegal colony. By going there, you become a fugitive. Better a fugitive than a prisoner, David replied, and better to fight for what's right than to hide from what's wrong. He looked at Zara, and in her purple eyes he saw not just love, but hope. Are you ready? She asked. David nodded, but then paused. Wait, what about the people I'm leaving behind? My friends, my co-workers. They'll think I just disappeared. Zara smiled sadly. The council's technology works both ways. Just like they gave you false memories, they'll give your friends and co-workers false memories too. They'll remember you getting a job offer in another city, remember you saying goodbye. It's kinder than leaving them wondering what happened to you. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than abandoning the people who cared about him without explanation. David felt a weight lift from his shoulders. There's something else, Zara said. The portal will only stay open for a few more minutes. The energy requirements are enormous. David looked back at the enforcers, who were still pushing against his barrier. What happens to them? They'll return to the council and report that you escaped. They won't be punished. They were just following orders. David felt his barrier beginning to weaken. His newfound abilities were powerful, but he was still learning to control them. I can't hold this much longer. Then it's time to go, Zara said, taking his hand. But as they moved toward the portal, David hesitated. Zara, what if I can't adapt to life on the sanctuary world? What if I'm too human or not human enough? She squeezed his hand. Then we'll figure it out together. That's what marriage means, facing the unknown as a team. The word marriage sent a warm feeling through David's chest. He could remember their wedding now, remember the promises they made to each other, not just to love each other, but to build a bridge between their worlds. Together, he said, and stepped through the portal. The transition was like diving into warm water. For a moment, David felt weightless, suspended between worlds. Then his feet touched solid ground, and he was standing on the sanctuary world. The first thing he noticed was the air. It was cleaner than anything he'd ever breathed, with a slight sweetness that reminded him of spring flowers. The sky was in deep purple, but it was a gentle, calming color that made him feel peaceful. Round them stretched a landscape that was both alien and familiar. Crystal spires rose in the distance, but they were surrounded by forests and grasslands that looked like they could have been from Earth. It was as if someone had taken the best of both worlds and created something entirely new. David, he turned to see a man approaching them. He was tall and lean, with graying hair and kind eyes. But what struck David most was how familiar he looked, like looking at himself 30 years. In the future, Dad, David said, the word feeling, strange on his tongue. The man smiled, and David could see tears in his eyes. I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again, when they took you for relocation, I thought. He shook his head. But you're here now. You're safe. David felt overwhelmed by emotions he didn't fully understand. This man was a stranger, but he also felt like family. I'm sorry I don't remember you very well. They took so many memories. That's okay, his father said. We'll make new ones. That's what matters now. Zara slipped her arm through David's. Come on, let me show you around. I think you'll like what we've built here. As they walked through the settlement, David was amazed by what he saw. Humans and Lyrians worked side by side, building houses that combined Earth architecture with alien technology. Children played together in parks where Earth flowers grew alongside plants that sparkled like jewels. How many people live here? David asked. About 3,000. Zara replied. Humans who chose to leave Earth, Lyrians who were exiled from their homeworld, and hybrids like you who escaped the Council's control. They stopped at a building that looked like a cross between a library and a laboratory. Inside, David saw people working on projects that seemed to blend science with art, technology with nature. This is where your father works, Zara explained. He's been developing new technologies that help humans and Lyrians understand each other better. Communication devices, cultural exchange programs, even new forms of art that both species can appreciate. David felt a surge of pride. And what do you do here? I help newcomers adjust to life on the sanctuary world, Zara said. Every person who comes here has left something behind. My job is to help them build something new. As they continued the tour, David met other hybrids like himself. Each had their own story of discovery, loss, and ultimately, hope. Some had been forced to leave Earth, others had chosen to come. But all of them seemed to have found something here that they couldn't find anywhere else. A place where they could be themselves without having to choose between their two natures. That evening, David and Zara sat together on a hill overlooking the settlement. The purple sky was filled with stars, some familiar from Earth, others completely alien. But somehow, they all seemed to belong together. Do you regret it? Zara asked quietly. Leaving Earth, David considered the question. I miss some things. My apartment, my favorite coffee shop, the way the morning sun looked through my kitchen window. He paused. But I don't regret coming here, for the first time. In my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Zara smiled and leaned against his shoulder. The Council thinks they can control the future by keeping our species separate. But they can't stop love. They can't stop hope. What happens now? David asked. Do we just hide here forever? No. Zara said firmly. We build. We grow. We prove that humans and Lyrians can coexist peacefully. And someday, when we're strong enough, we'll return to both worlds and show them what we've accomplished. David felt that familiar warm current flowing through him again. His abilities were growing stronger, but more importantly, he was beginning to understand his true purpose. He wasn't just a bridge between two worlds. He was proof that different species could come together and create something beautiful. I love you, he said, the words feeling more true than anything he'd ever said. I love you too. Zara replied. Welcome home. 6 months later, David received a message through the interdimensional communication network. It was from his former co-worker at the tech company, asking if he was enjoying his new job in California and mentioning that everyone at the office missed him. David smiled as he read it. The Council had kept their word about adjusting his friend's memories. To them, he had simply moved away for a better opportunity. They remembered him fondly. But they weren't worried about his disappearance. He sent back a message saying he was happy in his new life, which was completely true. As he typed, he could hear Zara humming in their garden, tending to Earth vegetables that grew alongside alien plants. Their first child was due in a few months, a little girl, who would grow up knowing both worlds as her heritage. David finished his message and walked outside. The sanctuary world's twin suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. In the distance, he could see the lights of the settlement coming on. Humans and Lyrians settling down for the evening in the world they'd built together. He thought about the hotel room where this all began, about the choice he made and the path that had led him here. The council had tried to keep the species separate through fear and control, but love had proven stronger than their barriers. David took Zara's hand as they watched the sunset together, their unborn daughter moving gently in her mother's womb. Tomorrow, he would continue his work helping other hybrids adjust to their new life. Next week, he would help his father with a new project to establish communication with sympathetic humans on Earth. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to build, and for the first time in his life, David Thompson knew exactly who he was supposed to be.